Hey, this is Bill Shupp. Welcome to a quick tutorial in After Effects about how to assemble a time-lapse sequence. I'm going to do both JPEG and RAW examples, and we'll start with the JPEG one. So I'm just going to do Command-I in order to import my JPEG files, and then on the desktop over here I've got the files right here. They're already exported to HD format, 1920 by 1080. And so I'm just going to click the first one, make sure JPEG sequence is selected, click open, and then I've got the sequence imported. So in order to use them, I need to create a composition. So I just can drag this onto the new composition icon here, and I've got the composition created. What I like to do is right click on the composition, go to the settings, make sure everything is correct, and rename it. So I shot this in Maroon Creek near Aspen in Colorado, so I'm going to rename this to Maroon Creek. I'm going to call it HD because that is the format, so it's easy to see later. And then the frame rate by default is 23.976, which comes out to be a little over 10 seconds. So I'll click OK. And in this case, we can actually play it back pretty easily. It's going to take a minute to load it into the buffer here, but when it's done, it should be playing at full speed since it's relatively low resolution. So that's pretty handy. You can see this is shot on a dynamic perception slider, the stage 1. And one thing you might notice is that there's a little bit of a bump in it, and we can fix that fairly easily. So right around here is a little bit of a bump, yeah. You also notice there are some people that are moving around in the back, and there's a way to fix that too. I'm not going to do that in a different tutorial though. So if we wanted to fix the little bit of the bump in there, what we can do is go to go to composition, go to effects. Where is it down here? We can search for, over here. It's for stabilizer, warp stabilizer VFX. Drag that on here. And one tip I got from Michael Shainbloom is to set the smoothness down to like 8%. Now this is going to take some time for it to go and analyze all of these, so I'm going to cut to the end. Okay, it's stabilizing now. And it's done. So when we play this back, it'll take a little bit more time because it's actually, well, maybe not. So it's pretty subtle, but there was just a little bit of a wobble as it came down because the older aluminum joints on the stage 1 weren't super clean, so they're better now with the carbon fiber. But that's pretty much how you can easily stabilize. You can get into these other options in here. I'm just using the defaults because on this simple kind of case it's really not a big deal. But you can certainly get into how the borders are handled as well as which method you're using, but I'm not going to get into that now. So, okay, so this looks pretty good, this HD clip from our exported JPEG files. In order to use these, by the way, now it's running, we can see that little warble is pretty much gone, which is nice. So, okay. And then now that we are ready to export it, we need to go back to our project here, make sure the composition is selected, and go to Add to Render Queue. And when it's down here, we can render it. By default, using lossless will be fine for this lower resolution. I'm going to choose the output here and put it on the desktop. And then you can render it, and it'll be fairly quick here. And now we've got our rendered file right here, which looks pretty good. So that is a simple approach to very simple stabilization of a HD JPEG sequence. And now I'm going to do a quick illustration of using RAW files. So again, I'm just going to do Command-I in order to get to the import screen, go back to my desktop, and on the desktop you'll see I've got my RAW files symlinked here. And so I'm just going to click the top one. You'll notice that there's both CR2 files and XMP files. This is really important. So when you edit your RAW files, for example, over here in Lightroom, I've got all of my files selected here in the gallery view, and I can right click and go down to metadata and save metadata to files. And what that will do is for each file it'll write out the XMP sidecar file that has the metadata, and that is what After Effects uses to read in what changes you've applied. So even if you've animated across them using Elder time-lapse or something else, it'll work. So by default it pulls up camera raw, so in case you have not actually written your metadata, you can do some adjustments here, and then it will apply it to the sequence by default. But since it's reading stuff in and there's a unique one per file, it'll go ahead and just apply each of those. So that step is kind of redundant, but or unnecessary. So anyway, we have our raw sequence here, and we need to create an actual composition from it. So I'm going to drag it just like before onto my new composition. Now we have our composition here, and I'm going to go to the settings and rename it just so I know what I'm working on. Call this Maroon Creek Raw, and you can see it's got the raw dimensions here. Now this one is going to be much slower, so I'm not really going to be rendering it here. What I usually do is just immediately render this into an intermediate codec that's much faster to work with. So in this case, I'm going to go to Composition and Add to Render Queue. And instead of using lossless here, I'm going to click on it, and the one that I like to use, it's under QuickTime, but you can go to the Format options, and we're going to change the codec instead of animation, which is the default Apple one. We're going to use GoPro Cineform, something I learned about from the Timescapes forum. Tom Lowe's, at least in the past, was a fan of this, and that's where I heard about it. So yeah, you can do 4 or 5 probably, depending on the size and the performance you want. 5 I think is the best quality, so I'm going to click OK there, and then everything else here I think is fine. So I'm going to click OK, and then again we can choose the output file. It's going to use the name of the composition, which is fine in this case. So I'm not actually going to render this out, but you get the idea. One thing to note is that the output file is going to be using this codec, and your default player, in my case QuickTime, isn't going to know about that codec by default. So you want to make sure that you go to the Cineform GoPro site and download one that you can use. I think it only works with the older QuickTime Player 7, but it'll by default work with the Adobe products, so if you're just bringing your resulting clip directly into Premiere, you'll be fine. But if you want to actually view it outside of these tools, you'll have to have the codec installed with your player. And it doesn't work, I think, with VLC, for example. So, but you can also use ProRes if you want. That's popular as well. I've just been using Cineform, and it works for me. So that's it. Let me know if you have any questions in the comments, and thanks for watching.